Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
And so you're talking to? Is it me?
Yes. Well, I hope so.
Okay.
I was joining the conference, so I don't know whether I should talk to you or to someone else.
Okay. No, I don't know whether there are other panelists waiting.
Well, there are a few, I see. Okay, but you can hear me, you can see me, then everyone can hear me and see me. Then it's okay. Okay, I'll then be back. Okay, thank you.
Good. So I switch. I remain on this link and I'll switch up my video and audio.
Me too. Me too. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
See ya.
Formātā šodien kopumā piedalās 48 dalībnieki no 18 valstīm. Pieslēgumiem mēs esam saskaitījuši no 22 pilsētām, sākot no vienas puses no Portugāles un līdz Grūzijai. Mēs runāsim 3 valodas – latviešu, angļu un krievu, un tulkojums tiks nodrošināts arī 3 valodas. Mums bija no paša sākuma izvēlēts 3 tēmas šai konferencē. Tā izvēle notika vēl Covid laikos. Tas bija par situāciju ekonomiku un par sociālām sekām. Tas bija arī otrais temats par to, kādā veidā vajadzētu apkarot dezinformāciju un kādā veidā vajadzētu...
How to tackle disinformation and how to promote minority media. And the third topic will be linked to education and multilingualism. Because of Russian invasion of Ukraine, all of these topics became somewhat redundant, obviously, as regards to economic situation. It is obvious that the crisis which began during the COVID was very mild compared to what we can expect this winter. As regards to disinformation, the threats that we faced can no longer be compared to the threats that we faced when the misinformation was spread about the COVID pandemic and vaccination. And now, after the war, also the attitude or the approach towards minorities has also changed. So today we are going to discuss all of these topics from the social and democratic perspective. And now I would like to give the floor for the opening statements to the president of our group, Garcia Perez.
Izskatās mums ir, kā parasti pirmā diena, pirmais minūtes tehniskas nianses, bet
I think that we are facing some problems.
Without dividing lines is today more important than ever. Sadly, again, we have a war in Europe, resulting in increasing prices of energy, food, and raw materials. Also the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. In a difficult time when we were recovering from the pandemic, Putin's cruel and illegal war showed us the value of democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental rights. This is not the time to make excuse and hide behind the war for those already knowing these values. Let's be clear, if there was a strong democracy and rule of law in Russia, if they had a leader respecting fundamental rights, there would be no war in Ukraine today. Wherever a dictator breaks the law, oppresses the people, and disrespects democracy, the war is at risk. We are seeing this very clear today, live in Ukraine. We need to strengthen democracy and make it stronger against disinformation. The waves of disinformation during the COVID-19 crisis were a clear reminder that the spread of the lies can prove lethal. Now we will face new disinformation campaign about the war in Ukraine without fearing actors seeking to sabotage the EU by spreading propaganda, fear, and conspiracy theories. Social media companies have a responsibility to promote credible news and information. Driven by profit, many of them will only focus on clickbait to increase users and growth in revenues, promoting a vicious cycle of disinformation. This cannot continue. Government also have to do more to improve media literacy, and here it's important to also grant access to independent information in minority languages. Friends, in times of uncertainty, populists and extremists grow. The best thing we can do for our democracies is therefore strengthening our social policies, because populists take advantage of inequalities. The more equal we make our societies, there are more opportunities and we isolate populists. The European Union has always continued to evolve with every crisis. We saw this also with the pandemic, where the EU moved away from its narrow focus on austerity to an approach of investment for the future. We are living in extraordinary times, and we will be just on our efforts to come out stronger after the crisis with a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient growth model. As a chair of the Conference of the Future of Europe Working Group on Economic and Social Issues, I see citizens demanding the EU to give them more rights and more social protections. Some elements can be found in existing policies. For others, we might need treaty change. It is both possible and necessary to reshape the EU in a way that will guarantee its strategic autonomy, sustainable growth, improvement of living and working conditions, and human progress without destroying our planet in the framework of the renewed social contract. We, S&D, will fight against inequalities and poverty. We will fight to strengthen the child guarantee, reinforce the youth guarantee, and ensure decent wages for everyone. We will also promote a social dialogue and strengthen the trade unions and collective negotiation so no workers fight alone. In our Europe, economic freedom will never come before social rights. We stand united to make sure that the European Union moves in the right direction, a union that protects democracy and freedom, fundamental rights, and a union that creates equal opportunities for all. I am sure that you will have a very good debate these coming days with plenty of ideas and specific proposals. We want to hear you, because the European Union Protect can only advance if politicians, citizens, NGOs, civil society, business workers, and different actors bring all their potential. Thank you.
This was Aracha Garcia Perez, the president of the European SD group, and now I would like to give floor to another head or president of the political group, the head of the Saima political group of Saskanya, Jan Srbanovic. Please, the floor is yours.
Unfortunately, there is no microphone for the speaker, so it's not possible to interpret.
The quality of audio is insufficient to provide interpretation. There are some problems with microphone, apparently. The war has, of course, changed the agenda on which we are currently working. Nevertheless, together with partners, we have put together the event, which is focused on three topics that have been announced in the agenda. And of course, we will have to tackle and face a lot of challenges linked to the employment. Now things have sped up quite significantly. We're pressed to implement changes a lot quicker. And this is the first day, and I'm very much looking forward to discussion on education. I would like to interrupt you, and it seems that unfortunately the sound is not getting through to our online viewers, and we will have to unfortunately pause for a bit to fix these technical problems.
Tā, mēs tagad cenšamies ļoti operatīvi atrisināt jautājumu ar to.
So now we are trying to fix the sound problems. You know, the usual case at big conferences, to have sound problems, unfortunately, you'll have to hold for a bit. We'll get everything sorted out. What I'm hearing is that sound is coming and going. So do we have sound? Can we continue? And we, of course, like to talk to each other, but we, beyond any doubt, would like to really communicate with those who are listening to us out there.
Patreiz komentārus cilvēki apspriež, tāpēc mēs runājam, bet skaņas nav, un viena versija bija, ka mēs atspēržam.
Well, one of the explanations offered by people to explain why we don't have the sound is that we are talking something that cannot be broadcast, but that's of course not true. But we will fix the technical problems or technical issues now, and we'll continue from the beginning again once we're fixed. So we will have to hold for a couple of minutes. Again, the floor is given to Jan Surbanos, so you can start from where you left off. Someone still thinks that Mr. Urbanovic's microphone is off.
Šajā sakarā es gribu atgādināt, ka Sociāldemokrātiskā partija saskaņa tas politiskais spēks, kuram visvairāk tas Latvijas mazākumtautību, īpaši tie, kur finansē sarādu. Tāpēc pašsaprotam, ka integrācijai un valodu politika mazākumtautību tiesības ir mūsu darba. Uzskatu, ka viena no lielākajām kļūdām, kas pieļaujoties pēdējo laiku, ir integrācijas vieddienā. Pēdējais piemērs, ka ir lingvālās izglītības. Ieviešana diskusijām nebija viegli. Tāpēc, ja tā tika uztvērta pretestīgi, ja tieši tāpēc tika attīstīta.
Latvijas referents.
Man liekas, Jāni, tev ar tu mikrofonu ir kaut kāda karma.
Jānis, it seems that there are some, karmic problems that you're having with that microphone.
Un rezultāti arī mēs samērā runa. Mums bija iemesls lepoties un dalīties pieredzi ar sev pilnībā ieviešanas pieredzi. Arī tagad, kad mums ir negaidīgi, bet nevajag redzams daudzus smairs. Pie valodā arī šeit notiek ilgdalās izglītības sistēmas iestrādes. Šī nevajag spiežot pilnos. Tagad atkāpšanās no virtuālās izglītības ir Latvijas pārkums, kad tas uzrāda. Integrācijas vietā ir stājusies neslēptas asamblās prāta. Ar nesamērīgu spiedienu jebkādu krievu valodu ar pilnīgu tās izšķelšanu izglītībā no bērntēm. Valdošo partiju līmenī tiek kultivēts uzskats, ka Latvijā ir integrēts cilvēks, tas var būt tikai latvietībā asamblēs. Tāpat laikā absolūti lielākā daļa Latvijas krievolotīgo cilvēku pilnvērtīgu skolu saglabāšanu uzskata par vienu no uzskatiem politiskajiem. Tā ir arī mūsu projekts. Latvijas neatkarības 30 gadu pieredze nereizi vien ir bijušas situācijas, kad iekļaujot mūsdienīgu demokrātijas principiem atbilstošas valsts attīstības ceļus mums palīdzēs atrast citu Eiropas valstu pieredzi un vispār pieņemt uz sevi. Piemēram, tā bija pilsonības līdz. Vienoti daudzveidībā, tas ir Eiropas valsts, kas prasa konkrētu saturisku ieplūtījumu arī Latvijas. Ļoti gribas cerēt, ka konkurence par Eiropas nākotnes dos savu ieguldījumu. Kā Eiropas kopējā nostāja palīdzēs Latvijas labošai elitei apzināties virtuālās izglītības vērtību, gan godīga dialogu nepieciešamību. Tas būtu mazs ieskats
and fragile. And he then ordered his son to protect and cherish minorities so that they may prefer to reside with you rather than elsewhere. So King Stephen I, who was founder of the Hungarian kingdom, he considered the national minorities the same way how we think about them today in the 21st century in the democratic countries, when in the majority of our constitution there is a sentence that national and other minorities are constituent element of the state. And this is so important to remind, especially now when we see in France and unfortunately in Hungary, how populist and nationalistic politicians are growing. And especially it's important to remind us how important it is not only for ethnic minorities, for all kinds of minorities to give the respect and to preserve our democratic values. Today, when it's these are times when we thought they will never came, and especially this kind of aggression, what happens in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. Why I am taking it out? Because if you see that in the 21st century, dictators, call them illiberals if you want, but they are dictators, aggressors, they always start in their own home country. They always start in their homeland. They first demolish the rule of law and democracy, and including minority rights in their own lands. And it's not only about media, civil organization, jurisdictional system, trade unions, you name it, all kind of free movement of people and inhabitants. But they are always nationalistic as well. They always say that their nation, whether it's a Russian one, it's somehow superior to all other nations. Their religion is superior to other religion. It gives the ideological background to these populist dictators. And I know it's going to be a long conference, and I'm sure that my fellow members of the European Parliament will say a lot of concrete things. But for me, the most important issue is at that moment, what to do? What is the solution for this kind of aggression, for this kind of nationalistic, populistic movement? And what can we as Europeans, Democrats, Social Democrats do? And let me tell you two things. First of all, when we talk about our values, values like democracy, like rule of law, like human rights, the right of minorities, all kinds of minorities, then it's not simply because we are good people. It's not simply because we have a belief and we would like to take on with it. But I strongly believe that protecting these values, it means protecting our interests. Being a politician always means that you have to make compromises. But the secret is how much compromises are you ready to take? And I think in the last decades, we have taken too many compromises with our values because we thought this will be the interest of European people, of European economy. And there is a point when you take too many compromises, that you compromise your values, but at the end, it will fire back on your interests as well, on your European people's everyday life. That's what's happening now in Russia. That's what happened in Hungary. That European Union was not strong enough to protect the rule of law. And whether we talk about minorities, about other human rights, whether we talk about free press or jurisdiction, this is always a global picture. There's no free country who is not protecting its minorities, and there is no dictatorship which is protecting its minorities. These are so linked together. So first of all, rule of law, do not make any compromises anymore. Do not make them, because we are going to be in the same situation as we are now, even worse. And the second is, I'm a strong federalist. I really do believe in the United States of Europe, however we are going to call it. And the past few years, with a lot of different catastrophes and different difficult times, proved that this is a way how Europe has to go. When it came to the COVID crisis, the healthcare crisis, then the common strategy, healthcare strategy was the one what gave all Europeans equal opportunity, for example, in access to vaccination. When it came to the COVID crisis as an economic point of view, then the recovery facility and these efforts that we make together gave an opportunity for those countries who were hit very strongly to act together. When we come now to the new refugee crisis, which is even larger, bigger, and much more long-lasting than the 2015, then a common European refugee policy is going to give us a solution. And when we talk about the aggression and military conflicts we are facing at the eastern border of your European Union, I'm definitely sure that the common defense and security policy is going to be a solution for that as well, in order to protect, as I told you, our European values. And meanwhile, that's the way how we are protecting our European people. So I would really like to ask you, and that's very good that the conference has a global holistic view, that when we talk about minority rights all over Europe, we should always remember that minority rights are part of a rule of law, human rights, democracy package, and none of one which can exist against or without each other pieces of this package. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara, so much for your inspiring address. And now from Hungary, we switch to Croatia. Biljana Borzan, she comes from this country, and she knows really a lot, if we can say so, about what is ethnic hatred and what kind of conflicts it can produce. Biljana herself is half Croatian, half Serbian. And Biljana, the floor is yours. We are waiting for your piece of experience. Thank you for staying special at home to get connected.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Niels. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here today with you to share some of my experiences for the past 30 years after the homeland war in Croatia and the problems with the minority rights. I'm a representative not of some minority in Croatia, but I would say the worst one. I don't think, of course, the worst one, but the one which is the most problematic, because Croatia was in a war with Serbia, and even today we feel the consequences of this war. And I would say that the hatred between Croats and Serbs, unfortunately, is still very alive in Croatia. Let me say a few things about history. As I said, the war happened 30 years ago. And after the war, we organized schools in with different programs. First of all, culture, history, and the language, and of course, script, Cyrillic script. Kids in classes learn, Croat kids learn only Latin, and Serbian kids learn Latin and Cyrillic script at the same time. They have different classes of history, and they even have opportunity to attend kindergarten with separated groups with small children. This is something that we organize for minorities, for every minority in Croatia. Also it can, for example, it is organized in Istria, where Italian minority is very large. And in my experience, I worked as a medical doctor in that part of Croatia, those parts of Croatia which have a high percentage of Serbs. And my experience is that in schools, kids are in different classes, but in kindergartens, parents do not like to separate the kids according to the nationality. I think it's maybe a good idea because, you know, in that period of life, I think that human beings are not mature enough to understand why somebody should be in this group or that group, and to learn maybe different songs. It's all kids songs, so it should be the same. I have to say that I grew up not knowing that I'm different. We all lived together. There was no differences between us. Since it was during socialist, or somebody would say communist, but I would like to say for Yugoslavia that it was a socialist time, because we were not typical communist country. We didn't celebrate Christmas or Easter or something that might show us as a kids that we are different. So we all grew up together not knowing who is who. And I think that this was the best part of my childhood, because today, when children are separated by their nationality, the hatred, as I said, is still very, in some areas, very high. So we have disputes between kids according to the nationality. And I think that you can give to the national minority whatever they need: schools, signs on official buildings, everything bilingual. But first of all, I think that you have to work with the majority to accept the minority, to accept that minority could give a beauty in diversity, and not to hate somebody according to their nationality. And I think that it's very important, of course, to work with the minority to be integrated in society in the best possible way. So we have a constitution and laws, and everything on the paper functions perfectly. But for example, a few years ago, we had a big problem. I'm sure that you heard about Vukovar. This was the city that was damaged during the war in the most severe way. And the wounds in the Vukovar are still, I would say, opened, because we have hundreds and hundreds people who are still not found, and they are dead, and they are not found, and their loved ones, their families couldn't bury them. So a few years ago, we had a problem, because our constitution and our laws say that if you have 30%, more than 30% of some minority in a municipality or a county, then you have a right to have bilingual signs on official buildings, and when you enter the city to see, for example, when we talk about Serbian minority, to see the signs in Cyrillic script and also in a Latin. And when our census show that we have more than 30% of Serbs in Vukovar, it meant that we have to organize their life so they have both languages on official buildings. And I would say that it was a start of one big disaster, because the people started, Croats were so mad because of that. And then they said, we don't want to do that. We know that Serbs, that we have 30% of Serbs, but we do not allow bilingual signs there. And the riots were very nasty. Police was also in a dispute with the citizens, and European Parliament then organized one open letter to a Croatian public and we called from the parliament for the things to calm down, to try to influence that the situation should be much more that the situation should be much more calmer, and we succeeded. After that, after this open letter from the highest level, from the European Parliament, things got better, and these riots stopped. And I think it's maybe good example how European Union can help or to mitigate, just to show that we are together, that we live together, united in diversity, and we should act as our slogan, which I think is the most beautiful slogan, says. So I would say that 30 years after the war, and the hatred still exists, and that it is the sign of unsuccessful society. Because after the Second World War, 20 or 30 years ago, Yugoslavia had GDP, for example, on the level of Japan. And we were back then economically very successful. And nobody was thinking about Germans, Italians, or our enemies during the war. So 20 or 30 years after the Second World War, Germans and Italians, who were our enemies during the war, were our dear guests as a tourist. So because this society back then was much more successful in economic sense, and we didn't think about Germans and Italians as our enemies anymore. Governments who are unsuccessful, they try with the hatred to get voters on the day of the elections. So you do not have to do, the philosophy is, you do not have to do anything. Just few weeks before the elections, remember, try just to remind people that war was 25 years ago, and they have to hate, for example, if they are Serbs, they have to hate Croats and Muslims, Bosniaks. If they are Croats, they would have to hate the other two nationalities, and then they will motivate all of them to be very active on the election day, and the success for them is guaranteed. So I think that this is a main message, that of course we have to talk about human rights, about minority rights. We have to have laws. We have to work with the minority to be integrated in a society as good as possible. we have to work with the majority to accept the minority and to embrace the minorities and not to have a position of a power. You know, we are majority and we can do whatever we want, and we don't have to ask anything of you who are a minority. That's all. Those things are all very important. But one of the most important things is to have economic stability, and then we will talk about projects. We will talk about things that will make our lives better, that will bring quality to our lives, and all the other things will go smoothly and or without difficulties. So as I mentioned, united in a diversity, as I think is the most beautiful slogan that should be used in every part of European Union. When we talk about Croatia and Serbs, when we talk about Latvia and Russian minority, this is something that that is the most important message, that the minorities can give diversity, beauty, and that you can learn from minorities some things that maybe are not familiar to you, that you can learn lots of things, beautiful things from another traditions, different cultures, and that this is something that can only enrich your life. And I think that we should send this message not only to grown-ups, but the kids from the earliest part of their lives, because they will be around some minorities, maybe national, maybe gender, who knows, in their life, and they would have to learn to embrace it from the beginning of their lives. This is something that I wanted to share with you. I hope that it was interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Biljana. Hvala. And now we are switching to Netherlands. My friend and colleague Mohamed Shahim is a member of the European Parliament. He was born himself in Morocco. He is working in the Parliament, being a champion for the Green Deal and the Fit for 55. But he's also well known for his abilities and skills to use different and various proverbs. What I like most of all was mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Sounds like this: everyone wants to go to heaven, but surprisingly, no one wants to die before. Mohamed, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Niels. And thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak here. I do feel a bit, well, not different, but I mean, I'm not an ethnic minority in the sense of that I live in a country where there's some history with, or some, you know, where you have some ethnic minority groups from neighboring countries. My parents were migrants. They came in the late 60s to the Netherlands from Morocco, finding a new future. And I'm a second generation. I have 5 brothers and a sister. We were raised in the Netherlands. The funny thing is I was born in Morocco, but I'm the 6th son. And all my brothers, 5 of them, and my younger sister were born in the Netherlands. So I was born somehow in a vacation. But I mean, it's a bit different because for me, for a long time and a long period, the Dutch government perceived these work migrants as temporary migrants that would go back home at some point. The Netherlands had a lot of experience with people coming from abroad to work, people from countries in the beginning like Portugal and Spain. Later on, they shifted to get people from countries like Turkey and Morocco. I think many European countries have similar experiences. Look at Germany, Belgium, France, and Spain, and also Italy. So it's a bit different. When I grew up in the 90s, we even had, and the Dutch government had a specific program. It was called Education in Your Own Language. It wasn't the full-time thing, but we had like once a week we had, let's say, 1 hour where they were teaching us either Arabic or any other country language. For example, if you came from Turkey, they gave you an hour of Turkish lessons. Again, with the ideas that at some point you would go back to your country. And they didn't insist a lot of time, especially towards, let's say, the first generation, to let them integrate and let them understand the culture, understand the language, as they would have done if they had maybe the idea that these people would never leave, which is, I think, the case where we are today. I mean, we're now talking about the 3rd and 4th generation of these children, of these migrants. And I mean, most of them just feel Dutch, as I feel, with a certain heritage. Let's say I really like the American approach of around ethnicity. At least you're all American, and then some are American Irish or American African American or American Mexican or American Italian or American Dutch. So you all share this identity of being from the same country, and then you have this ethnicity, or let's say a further coloring of your identity, which is which only adds up in flavor and does nothing or says nothing about loyalty. In the Netherlands, we have a lot of debate on loyalty of minorities today. So we had, for example, the crisis. There was a crisis between Turkey and the Netherlands where there were, I don't say that there were riots, but there was like a demonstration in Rotterdam where a lot of people with a Turkish background were walking over the bridge of the Erasmus Bridge in Rotterdam, using a lot of national flags. And there's always this idea of, are you loyal to the Netherlands, or are you loyal to Morocco, or are you loyal to any other ethnic group you belong to? And this is something that I personally really dislike, because having dual citizenship or a mixed ethnicity doesn't say anything about your loyalty and the future you want to have with your children in your own country. I remember that for me, this is something that's quite natural, that when we were raising my children, me and my wife, we didn't emphasize at all anything on whether he had a Moroccan heritage or not. For me, my children are really Dutch, and I can tell you they behave quite Dutch, and they don't speak the Moroccan language, which I do speak. It's also because me and my wife speak, our only lingua franca is Dutch, so it's very complicated to, for me at least, also being abroad a lot of time, to raise them multilingually. But I remember that he skipped a class because he was a very bright student, and all of a sudden he came home and he asked me, like, "Father, am I Moroccan?" And I answered, and I had no idea what to answer because I didn't understand where this came from. And then it turns out that his teacher thought it was an interesting project to group people based on their ethnicity. And for him, this was the first time he was confronted with being Moroccan or having a Moroccan ancestry. And that was quite a shock for him. Again, for me, I think we should understand that in every society, if we would do a DNA test, we will see that we come from all over the place. There's no one almost that can be found that has a 100% pure heritage coming from one single area in the world, because that doesn't make any sense. Looking at history, we have traveled around. We were hunters in the beginning, and we just went where we could find prosperity. And this idea of nationalist boundaries is something that's quite modern. For me, it's very important, if people live in a certain country, that they want to build and help that country prosper. And what your ethnicity then is, for me, that's really second. It's not that relevant. I mean, it's relevant if you take nice elements out of that identity and use them for your own personal life. For example, I love Moroccan cuisine. I love Moroccan cooking. I love the kitchen, but that doesn't make me, I think, less Dutch. For me, I also think the way that I was raised made me quite quite easy to understand that having a different background also means that you maybe perceive things in a different way. I think if you understand different ethnic minorities in your country, it's also easier to bridge towards them and try to find solutions if there are any problems. I think this is a very important one as well. And whether we from the EU should have like this law of to respect minorities, Niels, for me, this is a very interesting but also very difficult question, because the problem is the moment we ask this question means that there are problems. Because in a normal democracy, majorities respect the rights of minorities, because that's a fundamental right within a democracy. The moment majorities force things over minorities, whether they are ethnic or whether you disagree with them from a political point of view, that's when tyranny starts. And the moment we should start, writing down laws that we normally think, or based on ideas that we think should be normal in any democracy, that's, I think then there we should have a fundamental debate within the country to understand what's happening. The moment we should set up laws to protect, for example, the freedom of journalists or the diversity of journalism, that's the moment I think you have an issue with journalistic freedom in your country. Because again, for me, on the one side, maybe we should think about these type of laws to protect minorities because we see that things are going wrong, and we see that, as we've seen in the past, again, minorities are being used against each other from a nationalistic geopolitical point of view. And maybe we should use laws to protect this or to prevent this. But again, that's also a sad thing, because it means that we need laws for things that are not normal within a democracy. Maybe I will stop here and wait for the Q&A later on. Thank you very much, Niels, and good luck.
Thank you, Mohammed, so much for inspiring address and for sharing your personal experience, and also for the comments that when you have to discuss issues connected to the relations between majority and minorities, that means you've got some problems. In fact, we've got certain issues, let's put it this way, here at home. Let's be frank, and if we want to discuss them not only from the political point of view, but also from the professional point of view, I would like to switch to the expert that's invited to participate in our conference. But tagad būs ekspertam, kas piedalās mūsu konferencē, bijušais vispārējais konvencijas par nacionālo
former sign on the Convention on Universal Human Rights and the former the group representative.
When we talk about the situation in Latvia, we've got points like significant Russian minority, we've got war in Ukraine, we need to create at the same time united political nation, we have to respect rights of ethnic and linguistic minorities, and diversity as one of the main principles of the European Union. So this is a key points we are discussing. So what would be, if we talk about education, because right now we switch mainly to the issue of education for national minorities. So what would be optimal level of multilingualism when we talk about secondary education? Mr. Palermo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to this highly interesting conference. I guess I will have a lot to learn also from the practical experiences that are being shared. As I understand, I have little time, and I would otherwise have a lot to say. So what I'm trying to do is to help me with some slides. I am not allowed to share my screen, but maybe somebody can help with that.
Just 1 second, we will try.
Yeah, so also
hang on a second.
So as to spare you my face all the time, I think the slides
I
look.
think you can try it once again.
Yeah, let me try. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. And I think the slides look a lot better than my face. So that's why I think it's better. So, well, you tasked me with a different job, difficult job, which is to, speak about Europe and national minorities, and all that in about 15 minutes. So it's not an easy task. So what I'm trying to do is to say a few words on certain aspects, especially related to the trajectory of European minority law and policies, especially trying to, I wouldn't say imagine the future, but to see what can be a good strategy for the future, especially against the background of the latest developments and the conflicts that unfortunately occur. Now, yes, the first thing to be kept in mind is, what Europe are we talking about? Normally, when we use the word Europe, we mean or tend to mean the European Union, but this is just part of the story. And indeed, when it comes to minority rights, it is probably not the European Union the very first door to knock at. Because there are other circles, or as they have been defined, geo-juridical areas, concentric circles that deal more, I would say, professionally with the issue of minority issues. Now, there is a larger circle, the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which cannot adopt formal binding laws. It's only politically binding, but it's very strong, especially when talking about minorities, because it doesn't speak to the human rights commitments, but rather to the interests and the security of the states. And so, especially in crisis times like this one, there is something in it. Then there is, of course, the Council of Europe, which is the standard setting body. And in this sense is the one that should compromise less, although as we will see in a moment, this sometimes happens to perhaps to a degree which is a little bit beyond the expectations. The Council of Europe should tell the way and also support this way with legal tools. It has been, in a way, the polar star in the 1990s in shaping the minority rights. And it has lost a bit of grip recently. And then, of course, there is the European Union, which is the core, the smaller, but also the most powerful organization, because it can issue binding norms. But what the problem is, and it's working also in the European Parliament, it lacks a direct competence in minority issues. It has some, but it is scattered throughout the treaties, and it is very difficult sometimes to make a consistent puzzle out of it. So it should take probably a clever approach to this issue, and I will come back to that in my conclusion. So when we speak about Europe, we should keep in mind that we are addressing probably more than just one institution. Now, I don't want to go into the details of all that, otherwise it would take much longer than your patience will allow. But I have tried to visualize here the trajectory of minority rights from the 1990s onwards. And actually, it has gone in waves. It's not surprised that especially in the very first decade after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, there has been a very strong development of minority rights because simply they didn't exist internationally before. So a big growth. And then gradually, with new priorities emerging, the importance of minority rights has decreased. And one can argue that it has decreased also because of the success of the instruments that have been developed in the 90s. But then, when you do not have violence or major crisis, as it was the case most of the times over the past 20 years, then of course the importance of minority protection has disappeared from the radars, and other issues have become more important, starting from terrorism first, and then the economic crisis, and then the migration issue and the climate crisis, some regional problems that have occurred and have been very underestimated. Take Georgia, take Crimea, etc. And then the pandemic, and nowadays the war. So where do we find then the place for minority issues here? We have had a new peak, especially between, let's say, 2010, 2015, when a certain number of important instruments, soft law instruments, have been adopted at European level. I think of two thematic commentaries of the Advisory Committee for the Protection of National Minorities of the Council of Europe, and then a couple of guidelines by the OSCE Commissioner on National Minorities, especially focusing on the new challenges of minority issues. We have heard previous speakers talking, especially the case of Croatia, the shift from a sort of integrated society towards very communal separation based on ethnicity, etc. This was basically also the approach in the 90s. And then the new challenges have been how to deal with societies that are fluid, that are not, black and white, if they ever have been black and white. But the instruments still look at this perspective. So you are this or that, and based on what you are, you get certain rights, which is very important in the initial stage when, the alternative is probably oppression or denial of the rights. But it doesn't work when societies tend to be more peaceful. And therefore, as we have heard, the challenges are different. Identities are not so clearly marked. And these instruments have made clear that, for example, a term that was used by the previous speaker, the issue of integration, etc. Integration does not have to deal with or target one group that has to integrate into majority society. You know what we're talking about, especially from the Latvian experience, so I'm not going to develop further on that, but rather it is the society that has to integrate itself and to look at diversity as something that affects the whole of society. But in recent times, let's say after 2015, there has been a push back quite strongly towards assessing, the importance of identities, this populist challenge, and identity policies, requirements of loyalty. This has also been mentioned, very important. So if you are a minority, you are suspected or supposed to be disloyal to the state because, multiple identities are not considered to be something viable. So it is problematic, actually. But now we see that many of these international norms are disregarded more and more. And, if we end up with war, there is no need to say how much a war is disregarding international norms. So come to my final point, what are the possible strategies? What can we, reasonably think that could be made in order to help minority issues be better understood and therefore also better managed with a view of creating societies that are more integrated? What we have seen in the last years is that actually the international organizations have lost grip. This is probably also understandable because of those working for international organizations are not probably the bravest people in the world. But now it is difficult to even keep the basic assumption of the Copenhagen document 1991, according to which minority issues are not a purely domestic issue, but a matter of international concern. Do we see really the international organizations be proactive in this phase? No, not really. So what we can do is to try to take the best of each piece. It's like, creating a good recipe by mixing up the best that each season can offer. So instead of looking at only one organization, perhaps a better and stronger and wiser interplay among the various organizations, especially OSCE, Council of Europe and European Union, can be thought of based on the changing roles that they are facing due to recent developments and conflicts. So the OSCE, no surprise, becomes more important when there are conflicts, which creates also sort of a paradox, because its success, it's actually when conflicts are prevented, not when they explode. But without conflicts, they have much less visibility. So when there are conflicts, there is a growing awareness of its importance, but it also shows that it is less influential. But anyway, the fact that states should consider minorities not only as human rights obligations, but as part of their own security and interest, perhaps might help taking the OSCE political commitments more seriously. The Council of Europe is the other way around. Now, the expulsion of the Russian Federation, for example, makes it probably weaker. Of course, it was necessary, no question about that. But at the same time, if the rulings of the court and the standards set by the monitoring bodies are no longer applicable to the countries that do not respect them, so what is the purpose of having them in place? I mean, it's easy to preach respect of minorities when minority rights are respected. It is far more difficult to do it when they are not respected. And the European Union, last but not least, the European Union has, I think, gone through a very interesting moment of self-awareness when it comes to minorities. The failure of the Minority Safe Pack initiative, you might be familiar with that. It was a popular initiative, a citizens' initiative, which has collected more than 1 million signatures in more than 7 European countries, which are the preconditions to present a citizens' initiative, but has been rejected ultimately by the Commission due to the lack of power, of competence by the European Union. So this is not actually the right way to go, to call for the European Union to do what is not expressly mentioned in the treaties and enlarging the powers. It is not the right moment to do so. So it is much better to try to go for an indirect way, using the powers that the European Union already has in some fields of competence, maybe just supplementary, maybe just concurrent, but still, such as, for example, in the areas of culture, of media, cross-border cooperation, etc., etc. So if we keep thinking according to the same approach we had in the 1990s, well, then it will be very difficult, for example, to develop minority rights and to place them at the center, at the core of the action of all the organizations, which is necessary. Otherwise, they are completely neglected and forgotten, as we have seen in the last years. So, well, we should all start thinking in a different way. Especially with regard to complex issues such as identities that are not black and white, but need to be accommodated in a much more nuanced way. In terms of integration, that should be looked as something affecting society and not just groups of people, and also using the existing instruments for what they can do, and not asking the European organizations to do what they are probably not in the conditions to do at the moment. Hoping that placing minority rights at the core of European policies, at least using the indirect instruments that I've tried to mention, can then raise the awareness of their importance for the sake of peace and progress in Europe. So thank you so much. And of course, I'm available for further discussions and comments, and I hope that at least the slides have been helpful in supporting my arguments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And actually, yes, we've got a couple of follow-up questions. We've got 3 questions from the Latvian participants here in the digital art house on this stage. And we've got also 1 question, which we believe is interesting, which was selected at the moment from Facebook feed. So the first one is Konstantin. He is a member of the Riga City Council. Please.
Unfortunately, there's no microphone for the speaker, so it's impossible to interpret it.
Is it realistic to allocate budget to the Union to support schools of national minorities who like to keep
Yes, so if you've heard the question, you've got all options right now to answer.
I don't know whether it's me, but I was just told that due to the fact that the speakers don't have a microphone, so
do you hear me? Oh, okay. I will just, we will solve the technical issues as a way. So my colleague asked about from the legal, political, or whatever point of view, what do you believe? Is it possible and feasible that we end up having European Union level financing to support linguistic or national minority schools across the European Union?
Yes and no, in the sense that this is exactly the way to go, but the support should be for sectoral areas where the European Union has already a competence, like, for example, culture or media or other sort of support, like, I don't know, broadcasting cross-border televisions or producing contents, minority language books, for example, instead of importing them from abroad, which is an issue in many countries, producing them locally with financial support of the European Union. All these sort of activities are not only possible, but highly desirable. To set aside a specific budget for minorities as such would be problematic, as the Commission has told in rejecting the Minority Safe Pack initiative. So this is exactly the example I had in mind, not straight, but just slaloming a little bit to come to the result. So thank you for the question.
Another question comes from Anna Vladova. She is the principal of one of schools that runs programs for linguistic minorities, and she's also a member of Riga City Council. Anna, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Palermo, for your speech. Can you hear me? Let's check. All right, fine. So the question is as following: taking into consideration the fact that in Latvia the percentage of Russian-speaking minorities family is rather high, do you think we should think and should speak about the freedom of choice for those families, for those Russian-speaking families or minority families of other languages, to have possibility to choose the school where they send? Of course, taking into consideration that state language, which is Latvian language, should be at a very high level. Thank you.
$1 million question. Well, you know, I'm coming from a German-speaking area in Italy, where we are debating this issue in a luckily less conflict-related context for decades now. So we have a separate school system. So you either enroll into the German-speaking or into the Italian-speaking school, and this is not considered to be, you know, the best way of promoting a truly integrated society. But the alternatives have not been developed yet, although there are many proposals. So when it comes to your question, in principle, the freedom of choice must be guaranteed, because all the alternatives are worse. What is the alternative? You force people, like pupils or their parents, to follow something, a school model, that is not what they have preferred to choose. This creates a lot of resentments. I could tell a lot of stories of people here in my region where, you know, they have been enrolled in one or the other language school, and that has had exactly the opposite effect of rather than, you know, creating or bringing the groups more close together, actually the opposite effect was achieved. So there must be, of course, within the framework of the freedom of choice, a very strict requirement when it comes to the language skills. And I know I don't have to tell it to Latvians, where, I mean, the language requirements for the national language are extremely high and demanding. But still, if you allow, you know, freedom of choice, but then you demand a high degree of fluency in the state language, regardless where the pupils get it, then this is probably better than forcing people into a school system which is Latvian language dominated, but then creates a sort of rejection by the speakers, because this doesn't necessarily mean, but you are, you know, more competent than me, that the pupils really learn the state language. I don't know whether I made myself clear in that explanation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And my colleague Evgenia, she is following the feed on Facebook. So there is one. My colleague Evgenia, she's following the feed on Facebook. So there is one question from the comments. It is very simple, but simple questions usually require sophisticated answers, as we all know.
Hello to our audience and our speakers. I will read out the comment.
Is it possible not to divide society into a majority and minority, and thus we could avoid a lot of problems? If yes, then why don't we do it? And if no, why isn't it allowed?
That requires a sophisticated and philosophical type of answer, but we would love to test you.
Indeed. Well, the question is not simple either. Well, I will try a very simple answer, sorry. It's simply not possible as long as people don't want it. And this goes both for majorities and minorities, or, normally groups tend to be very jealous of their identity and to see it threatened by others. And as long as this attitude doesn't change, we will always have minorities and majorities, and trying to keep clear dividing lines among the groups. So I wish this would disappear at some point, but I don't think it will happen anytime soon, rather the contrary. And B, I wonder what would be the price for abandoning this attitude, which I think would be desirable, but then it should not go at the expense of the pluralism in society, the cultural diversity that different groups can bring to a society. So it should not be something that makes societies poorer, but just something that makes them richer.
Participating in our conference. Good luck and stay safe. And we switch right now to our colleagues on stage. Mēs tagad pārslēgsimies. Cerams, ka visiem kolēģiem, kas atrodas šajā zālē, mikrofoni.
I hope that all colleagues who are on the stage will have their mics working, and the broadcast will be just fine, will be smooth. We've talked a lot about national policies, but let me pretext this by mentioning that on 8th of April, we submitted or received for the public consultation the amendments prepared by the Ministry of Education and Science, and within 3 years, from 2021 to 2024, the switch will be made to the Latvian language tuition only on all levels. And the minister has said that from the primary school up to the end of the secondary school, children should be learning in the same language, which would provide for a more cohesive society and the information landscape and so on and so forth. Language education in one language is the best way not to separate the children and consolidate the Latvian population. I would like to start by giving floor to two headmasters, both from the Saskaņa party. Gunters and Anna come from schools that are implementing a very different approach. One of them is a traditional school with a bilingual education program. Now it is a school that uses both Latvian and Russian language programs. And then we also have the school, which is led by Mr. Jirgensons, which teaches only in Latvian. It is in Sarkandoga, although 40% of its pupils are minority children. Will start with Anna Vladova and then continue with Gunters and compare two different models. Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to participate in this conference. Very interesting topic and a very painful topic as well. I was listening very carefully to the previous speakers, and I thought to myself that actually around Europe and around the world, we can see, because we are focused on Europe today, we see similar challenges being faced. We, of course, have our different vision on how to solve them, how to overcome these challenges. But it is nice to see that we are thinking or concerned with the same issues of namely social cohesion without separating people based on any religious, ethnic, or other basis. And it is apparent that to create a cohesive political nation, we need to start with education, no matter where you are in the world. Good education, which is easily accessible and suits the needs of every child, is something that is obviously our primary goal as headmasters. The education system where all children have the possibility to learn the official language and do so with a lot of enthusiasm and affection, and also deepen their family language skills that can help them find better job in the future and study in any European or world country. Unfortunately, Latvian education system currently does not offer everything that I mentioned, and unfortunately we cannot hope for this becoming a reality anytime in foreseeable future here in Latvia, which is something, of course, for more than 3 decades, the ruling parties, coalition parties, systematically destroyed main advantage of having multicultural, multilingual society. Unfortunately, wrong basis reforms and changes in the past 3 decades have made the situation harder, in addition to lack of teachers. And we should address this issue as soon as possible, and we should offer free education to future teachers as soon as possible. We need to agree with municipalities on what the social guarantees, social security for the new teachers, young teachers is going to be. Once we've solved this, we will turn the crisis into an opportunity and we'll be able to focus on creative and convenient education in system in Latvia country. We see a lot of refugees from Ukraine coming to Latvia, hundreds and thousands of them, and we have to integrate them with proper care and understanding and integrate them into the Latvian education system. What do we hear from our Minister? We can hear from her that from the 1st of September, it was planned that from 1st of September 2022, we will implement education in Latvian only, or on all levels. And that's a fact that everyone is aware of. And we also know that a lot of Ukrainian children in their home are talking both in 2 languages. So this is something that we should also consider as well. After the 24th of February, the world will no longer be as it were. We have to accept that our country will become even more multi-ethnic than it were. With refugees from Ukraine arriving, we can also expect other migrants from Russia and Belarus fleeing to our country. Those who don't want to live in the respective regimes, don't want to be oppressed by those respective regimes. And those are people that can benefit our state and the European Union as a whole. Latvia, with its rather unique bilingual education experience, that major investments, we can convert it into a multilingual education with English, French used alongside the current languages, has a unique opportunity to become one of the champions of education across Europe. And I'm absolutely certain that European citizens are interested in such a hub or center developing here, because it is important for the EU future, for their future, and they will be support our country once we're ready to launch such an extensive or large-scale multilingual education project or endeavor. And Latvia can play a major role in shaping new Europe, Europe-centric world, and we need to get rid of the nationalistic policies and over excessive nationalism, because by becoming a multilingual and ethnic education center, Latvia will be able to protect its official language better than any requirements and levels of Latvian can ever do, with respect towards children and people who are doing their best for their country. For Latvia is the best way to nurture and protect the Latvian language and culture it is better than inspectors coming and performing on the spot checks and applying penalties. And I'm very hopeful. I hope that we'll be able to create a nation which is based around the same policy and based on social and democratic principles. Well, thank you, Anna. And now let's go over to the Sarkadalgo experience on how to create one nation based on one policy. Good afternoon, dear participants, and I'm really honored and delighted to have been invited to take part in this conference. And as the chair just mentioned, indeed, my school has switched to a Latvian-only education, and the main language of instruction is our official language, the Latvian, although around 40% of our children or pupils speak other languages than Latvian at their home. It's mostly Russian, of course, but we are, of course, loyal to our country. We're patriots of Latvia. And if you doubt that, just look at my school. My school was the first in Latvia which started teaching national defense classes at its school. And we also have very strong jet force, or the youth guard movement at our school as well. And those children who are struggling with Latvian education in Latvian have all kinds of support available in Russian. All the teachers can explain them, offer them additional explanations, and translate for them into Russian, and can talk or work with them individually. And now, since we have more Ukrainian kids in our school, and those in those upper years, and those younger teachers offer additional explanations in English because they find it easy to communicate in English. And we would have less problems, I think. There would be less dividing lines in our society if, home language would be Latvian, if more attention would be given to home language. After the Second World War, when Latvians had to flee and had to leave Latvia as refugees, they learned the languages of their countries of residence and tried to speak at home the language of the country they were living in. And they, of course, used their mother tongue as well, but that's why they're integrated much more successfully, because they used the language of the country of residence at home as well. And of course, there's also the financial factor, financial considerations with switching from one curricula to another. We need to change the teaching aids and textbooks, and I'm happy that our country, like richer European countries, is allocating sufficient funding for this switch, and can also continue funding the textbooks in minority languages, because, it is not as easy to get the textbooks from their home countries as well, but there are some initiatives for that as well. Some of the books are being brought in from Ukraine currently, and being used in the education process. But of course, Ministry of Education and Science should very carefully evaluate whether those textbooks and the curriculum from the home countries can be also recognized based on our teaching or education standards. But I'm happy that it is happening. As regards to the use of languages, I would, somewhat be okay with concerns that you have, or some had rather, about switching fully to Latvian in schools, although this approach hasn't been implemented fully as of yet. We're just testing it, but as far as I understand, starting from 2023, same as we did with the new standard, we will see the gradual switch to Latvian only education. I do assume that fear plays some role in that, because we think that we need to protect the Latvian language, that it is under threat. How justified are those threats or risks or concerns? Well, quite justified. In the 19th century, for example, Ireland, which switched to English only education, it lost its, Celtic roots and Gaelic language, not because they were somewhat forbidden to speak Celtic, but they chose to speak English, and the same applies to Belarus, less than 28%, not because somebody would be forbidden to speak Belarusian in Belarus, but because they chose Russian as their main language of communication, and Latvia has a land border with Russia. Russia has very strong media, very strong propaganda, so the concern is real about Latvia being pushed out in some regions. Latvian is spoken less than Russian. For example, in Riga, Latvian speaking we have 43%, and 53% in Riga claim that their main language is Russian. In Latgale, it's 41 against 55 Latvian Russian ratio. I do assume that it is because Latvians are afraid or concerned that people will switch to other languages when talking publicly, when communicating with others, and that's probably the main reason why Latvians are so concerned. And I already gave examples about the English and Russian language. And that's all from me. If I may, I'd like to ask an additional question. Your school is a very good example because it offers education in a non-segregated manner. No matter what reform you implement, and we have seen all kinds of reforms with different ratios and different sort of percentages, but all of them have failed to address the main disadvantage of the Latvian education is where you have separated classes, Russian class, Russian-speaking class and Latvian-speaking class. Is it possible? Can Sarkandauga be a role model? Can others, implement or emulate your model in other parts of our country? Well, I should say, God bless, whatever the success stories, because, during the breaks in the corridors, we hear Russian being spoken a lot, and that comes naturally, and nobody, sort of reprimands children for that. We are very friendly and very united, and children, of course, have all kinds of quarrels, and they do have, they are children, but there are no ethnic conflicts between them. Just normal child behavior there, and teachers individually, switch between languages easily and don't mind switching between languages. And we also have various funded initiatives for, additional extracurricular classes for the children where teachers explain, something in Russian when children need additional explanations. So, thank you. And we also have one question from Facebook comments. Yes. Please, the floor is yours. And the question is,
do schools face bullying towards Ukrainian children, and how these situations and conflicts are resolved?
Short, please. Well, thank you for the question. Yes, indeed, we get a lot of hints from media about bullying of Ukrainian children and Russian children. And we must understand that, you have to take it on the case-by-case basis, especially when you have a lot of Ukrainian kids. And in my school, I have a lot of Ukrainian kids, and we try to address these issues on sort of case-by-case basis. And we have staff monitoring what's happening inside classrooms, what's happening with kids. And as soon as we see that something might go wrong, we, of course, intervene. But thank God, until now, no problems have occurred.
So carefully, individually, we have to speak about these issues with each child separately, also their parents, perhaps. So we also have several Ukrainian children at our school, and we've only had one incident so far by one student who was probably more just sort of showing off. This was not really an aggression against the other student as such, as and there was a dispute about Ukraine and Russia, but the issue was dealt with individually. We spoke with the student, we spoke with the parents. Well, thank you. I now introduce the rest of our speakers who will continue with this debate. Now, Andres, please. The floor is yours. Well, thank you. I will explain my experience. I'm 43 years old. I have two university degrees. I have 3 children. I'm from Riga. I live in the Purvciems district, and I spent 3 years in the United States in a student exchange program where I obtained my secondary school diploma. But this experience in the US greatly expanded my worldview and obviously improved my language skills. The current terrible events around the world have had a serious impact on the conscience of Latvian people, and many have started thinking about existential issues such as who we are, what our place in the world is, where are we headed, what do we want to be. Personally, I came to the conclusion that I finally feel a patriot of my own country. There came a moment when I understood that myself, my wife, my children, we only have one homeland and we love it very much. And I am certain that a large part of our population who previously never thought about these issues have come to the similar conclusions and ideas. For me, it's clear that there's only one way forward. Latvia is a part of Europe. We cherish European values, and we will build our lives based on these values that are democracy, prevention of discrimination, adherence to human rights. Based on a 2020 study by the magazine Spectrum, 20% of Russian-speaking population in Latvia completely supports European values. And the survey looked at people aged 18 to 35 years with higher education and high incomes. And I think that this shows that the majority of our population, regardless of what language they speak at home, they see themselves as citizens of the European Union. And this certainly has a lot to do with the ability to freely move around the union and to work and study and so forth. And what we see in these results, we definitely like, and we see that we can live the same as our neighbors without worrying about our future. And no other social or governmental system will be enough for our people. And I think that this is also a factor that denotes the loyalty to the state by Russian-speaking people. My son is studying in first grade, and he studies Russian only in Russian language classes. The rest is in Latvian, and for a 7-year-old, he's pretty fluent in Latvian, and before that, he did not have special Latvian language classes. The beginning was difficult, but he's greatly motivated to know Latvian and speak Latvian because his sport team is Latvian, and most kids on the team are Latvian as well. At home, we speak Russian. At the moment, we are reading and listening to fairy tales in Russian. We watch animation videos in Russian or English. But obviously, we consume English online and use Russian at home, Latvian in public interactions. So the Russian-speaking children currently need to do a lot in order to ensure their competitiveness, and this is a challenge for their parents as well. They have to put in a lot of work and investment. How fair this is in the first years of school, that's a question. In this regard, we'd like to see more solutions from schools rather than just populistic slogans from the governing parties. Based on a social survey, 88% of respondents believe that it is extremely important to be able to obtain education in your native language. And the resolution of this issue would be very important for our society with the long-reaching social and economic effects. Thank you, Andres. Now before I give the floor to Elbeta Klivtova, I'd like to thank her publicly because our next panel will be most interesting, and it will be thanks to Lisa, who has done everything possible to ensure that we have bilingual, multilingual school representatives from so many European states. So thank you so much.
In order to survive the time of shock and instability in which we are now, of course, we need some very stable basics. And the education in our country has long been the source of a lot of disagreements, and we need to find a solution. But the education politics for a very long time was at the service of other policies, memory, security, geopolitics, and so on. I think when we are looking for an answer, we need to remember that education should serve, first of all, a human being. For 10 years now, I have been a stakeholder in the education politics and participated in a lot of discussions, and I have observed how the voice of professionals has been ignored. The voice of experts, psychologists, linguist has been ignored. When an expert has not been heard at the court because his answer could be unbeneficial. When a scientist is expected to provide a written answer and he receives a phone call from the ministry who reminds them about their source of financing. So when decisions are being taken with regard to the education policy, first we need to think about the image of a future that we would like to have for our children, and we need to balance it against our reality and resources. As a lot of citizens, I would like all the Latvian children to have good education, because this is the basics for the future of all of us. As a parent, I would like my children to live in a free and open society where they could use the advantages of their mother tongue. The mother tongue becomes an advantage when the basic skills are based upon it. When writing skills and reading skills are in their mother tongue, they provide the basics for the second and third language and so on. For mathematics, for example, it is also very important for the in mother tongue, because that makes people able to develop their analytical skills, and that is the basis for all the other sciences. This is where the mother tongue is not a reason for lagging behind, but it becomes an engine for further development. So when we talk about the ethnic minority education, the minimum for equal opportunities is the bilingual education, where the mother tongue, literature, and mathematics are taught in the mother tongue.
I would like to reach out to my fellow Latvians. Let me refer to UNESCO research, global research on education around the world. Using the mother tongue can improve your grades, and 40% of the world population have no access to education in their mother tongue. And the brightest minds around the world are looking for the modern tools that can provide the opportunity to access education in your mother tongue. In our day and age, multilingual education is a way to reconcile both objectives, to provide education, to achieve integration and good grades as well. A number of bilingual schools around Europe is growing. The international education program, bachelor's study program, is bilingual, based on bilingual approach. Bilingual education is a good way to strengthen the Latvian language and its role, because in European education area, on top of German, English, and French, we are also using Latvian, which has equal role. We don't make our pupils choose between English or Latvian. You can study both with ease. And I think that the main feature of the common European area is multilingualism and bilingual education. That is why it is equally important for the Russian children, for the minority children, and Latvian children. And I should say that Latvia doesn't have fixed position on whether bilingualism is good or bad, because since early 2000s, Latvia actually developed programs for minorities, bilingual programs for minorities, and now we see bilingual programs also being used in Latvian schools, where you have international bachelor's programs and other programs. However, since 2021, bilingualism shouldn't be something that should be developed among minorities, whereas, for example, bilingual education with one of the official European languages is getting stronger in order to be fair, in order to give equal opportunities to everyone, which shouldn't be, discriminating between European languages on one hand and Russian, Ukrainian or Hebrew on the other hand. As Europeans, we have to take care of equal opportunities in education for all. We must make sure that our education system is open to all languages. I know that there are concerns about Latvian language and education in Latvian language. My colleagues already described that abundantly. But in order to promote the use of language, we need to strengthen the solidarity and love for our fellow countrymen. If we get rid of the stereotypes, you'll see that, there are a lot of people who want to learn Latvian better, speak better Latvian, but we don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough textbooks, our approaches are not efficient enough. And once you realize that, you have clear objectives when it comes to education policy. We need more teachers, we need better methodology for teaching Latvian, we need new textbooks based on skills-based learning, we need to improve our centralized exams, and even some Latvian kids are reaching only 50% score there. If we would have an excellent education system in Latvia and for all, we would be able to achieve our goals much more efficiently, and it inspired me and many other people to act instead of trying to support Latvian by diminishing Russian. I think that the choice is obvious. We need to be united and respect each other. I would also like to mention resources. A couple of months ago, the biggest challenge in our education system was lack of teachers, which resulted in inability to provide education up to the all applicable standards. Now we're dealing with another challenge: how to integrate Ukrainian refugee children into our education system. All the teachers are very enthusiastic and working hard to integrate them, but emotions will fuel you for only a couple of months, and after those months you need an institutional solution, a systematic solution. The lack of teachers will still be there, will not go away. So life basically forces us to make our education system more open, bilingual education in Ukrainian as well. Integration of Ukrainian curricula into our study or programs is also very important. So I would like to go back to security policy now. Evidence-based education policy is just as important as our membership in the alliance and security policy. In order to allow kids to develop fully as personalities, is very important to promote peace and to defend European values. By teaching critical thinking, we can efficiently counter disinformation. Good education, motivated teachers is something that is much more difficult than shutting down channels and prohibiting something. But this uncertainty will continue to linger around Europe for a while, and we have to face the facts and have to recognize that bilingual education is something that Latvia needs more than ever. Thank you. The South Kenya, the group leader in the Riga City Council after constitution will have a short technical break so that we can get other panelists on stage, and then we will have a discussion with headmasters from other European countries. Constance, please, the floor is yours.
So hello, and first let me explain why I'm here. I am from the Latgale region, where I obtained secondary education in Russian. And as a university student, I moved to Riga, and I studied for 1 year in the Russian language program in higher education, but then all higher education was moved to Latvian, but it didn't really cause any problems for me, as the IT sector and exact sciences, where the language in which you learn is not all that important. I have 2 children as well, and when they were born, my interest became heightened as I saw all the problems that have popped up in our education system over the years, and how much the use of native language is being reduced. And I think that this is hindering the education process. And the overall quality of education has gone down. The accessibility of higher education has also gone down, which in future presents a risk for reducing the overall quality of life for the Latvian population. So education is one of the most important issues, not only for myself, but I believe for all of our voters. And I'd also like to add that since 2012, I've been a member of the Advisory Council of the Ministry of Education, and on April 7th, we heard about the new reform, about which there will be a public debate in the near future. But overall, what I wanted to talk about, we don't live just in Latvia, we live in Europe, and I've read a lot, and all of our event here today is about the future of Europe. So I read through various documents about the trends that we are seeing today, and I'd like to share some of my observations and conclusions. At the moment, we are all witnessing and so part of the various problems in Latvian education system and times of instability. And of course, this does not apply only to Latvia, but also many other countries that have been used to their linear solutions to their national problems. However, the new European course has created more internationalization of education throughout Europe. COVID-19 showed us the importance of integration and equality in the education system, and actually the accessibility of quality education based on the geographical location of students. Today, quality education in the EU is no longer represented without cross-border cooperation and mobility. And we're also developing digital skills that are necessary in order to collaborate with institutions from various different countries and education institutions, both remotely and in present. And the European education area is becoming a place where we are promoting the idea of the double freedom of both students and educators. This means open borders for both students and their teachers, as well as higher education professors and students, and helping them to maintain their culture, their language. It is intended to promote language skills, and in order to attain this, Latvia will have to take an unconventional approach and move away from monopolizing the education process, instead promoting integration into the general European area, which is characterized by diversity, both in culture and language. Despite the fact that we have not ratified the European Minority Language Charter, the overall trends in European politics are driving us towards having to ensure skills at a cross-national level. This means that we need to bring in teachers and parents, not only the government. The needs of our parents have long since exceeded just the resources of a single nation. Our people want a European education that is not related to just a single government, single state, that is aimed at resolving topical challenges and issues and maintaining culture, of course. So in order to attain these cross-national or supranational models, it's legally already possible. However, there have to be additional steps taken. For example, there's no obstacles to joining any university one wishes. Remote education is also possible, although it does present certain challenges. These are issues that need to be worked on. We have to think about the technical and political obstacles that need to be removed. I could also add that at the moment we have Ukrainian refugees here, and they have all the possibilities to learn within their own educational system, just remotely, so they can continue following the Ukrainian curriculum. So if their teachers are still in Ukraine, for example. So here on site, we would just need assistant teachers that can help the process technically. In general, what I wanted to note is that what we need to move towards is provide freedom in the educational process, the freedom of choice in education. And I believe that the European educational standards that we need to abide by, that would guarantee that people from any country have a greater freedom of choice and can easy integration from anywhere in the world. And I could perhaps mention a list of the main elements that should be at the focus of the European education model. First of all, a approved European education standard. Second, teachers that are able to implement the European standard. At the same time, we have specific professional groups that decide on methodology to achieve results. Third, parents, so being customers that can send their children to learn in accordance with this model. Four, we have one center that allows to combine remote education with in-person training. This does not necessarily have to be a school. This can be just an educational center, which the main function of which is to help children integrate into the program, resolve various technical, psychological issues that we've mentioned before. Some of the teachers can be in different countries. Some classes can be held remotely, online, with or without feedback from the teacher. Five, funding sources. We need to understand that these programs need to be funded from the European budget in order to help make them be independent from the national policies of member states. We need to have a European budget for this. We need clear standards and clear rules for the education centers that wish to obtain this funding. And the last point, number 6, of course, we need to have exams and a system of control. Thank you. Thank you, Konstantins. And now we have a brief technical break so that we can change the our panelists here on site and listen to the experience of our experts with the multilingual education. So thank you.
Vai mēs esam atkal tiešraidē?
Are
Labdien!
we back online?
Нашего сегодняшнего дня проводится на русском языке. Главный вопрос – это…
Hello again. Our last session today is in Russian. Our first question is bilingual education in the EU schools and the perspectives of multilingual education in general in the EU. Today we have representatives from various countries of the European Union, but in all cases, we are talking about teaching using several languages, where one of them is Russian. And the question that I was trying to ask, and I'm going to continue to ask both from professional and political background and from the point of view of human rights, where is this balance when, on the other hand, the education ensures you with the knowledge, perfect knowledge of the language, of the official language of the country, and on the other hand, you preserve the knowledge of your mother tongue. And the thing that we today discuss and today underlining, which is related to the human rights. So today we are going to have a discussion about the experience of a bilingual education. Today we have the educational coordinator of bilingual international schools in Berlin and kindergartens, Alexander Ott. Thank you. I would like to thank the organizer of this conference, Niels Ushakovs. Thank you for this event. I represent International Lomonosov Schools in Berlin. We have two of them. And I would like to share my slides with you. I will need some help from you. So, for example, this is the image of our schools. We have two international Lomonosov schools. One is in the Western Berlin, the picture on the left, and the other school is in the Eastern Berlin, and it has two buildings. The picture in the middle of the slide is one of them, and the second building is the other one. So in this international school, they have been established in 2015 in 2007, 2008. For around 15 years, they have been there, and we are the officially recognized school by the Senate of Berlin. It is not only recognized, authorized, but it also has been licensed by the Berlin Senate, and it covers the grades from 1 to 13, and all the three pillars of education have been recognized by the Berlin Senate. And the school is fully bilingual, so we work in two languages, German naturally as the language of the country and as the mother tongue, and we also teach Russian, not only as the language, but we also teach some subjects in Russian. Right now, we have about 600 children in our schools. Most of these children are, of course, inhabitants of Germany, inhabitants of Berlin, and some of them are children from mixed families or from migrant families. From families with migrant biography. We have a lot of children from Russia, from Ukraine, and other former Soviet republics, as well as other countries. In this regard, we do not divide children, as I heard it before, into some streams, as Latvian stream and Russian stream or flow. We have the education on the basis of the framework plans of the lands of Berlin, and we complement it with the language and culture components. the profile of international schools, as you can see on the slide. We are a bilingual school, and we have the principle one person, one language. That means that we have both German-speaking teachers and the Russian-speaking teachers, the native speakers. And it is extremely important for us to make sure that each teacher works in their mother tongue, and children throughout the entire school day are immersed into both languages. And they communicate in both languages, and they know which teacher to talk in which language to. Can you see? It is very important for us if the main teacher in our class is a German language, for example, teacher, then they work in a pair with a Russian colleague, Russian assistant, so that they can communicate with both children. So we not only teach Russian and German as languages, but we also have subjects in Russian. So it means that not all the subjects, but some of the subjects are taught in German, and then we divide hours within these subjects, and we teach mathematics, including, in addition to German language mathematics, we have mathematics in Russian with another teacher in other days and on other times of schedule. Not as you imagine that it all happens at the same time, the same mix, that two teachers are at the same time in the same class. This model also exists, but we don't use it. Then our school is a full day school. So this bilinguality is not possible only during one half of the day until the lunch, for example. And if they live in a Russian-speaking family, then they will have no contact with the German language. This is why it is important for us, if we want to achieve a consequent bilingualism, it is important for us to make sure that children are at school not only in the morning until lunch, but also to have them in the after school hours, which are both also in both languages. Some children stay even as long as until 6 in the evening. It is especially comfortable and useful for working parents.
And, as we are an international school, we pay a lot of attention to English. For us, English is the first foreign language because German and Russian are considered to be two native languages, and we teach both German and Russian as two native languages, native for our children, with English being the first foreign language for our children. And starting with the second grade, not with the third grade, as it is customary in Berlin school, we start teaching written English starting with the second grade, and by the sixth grade, we have more hours of English than German or Russian. That is why English is extremely important for us, so that to make our children internationally competent, so that can communicate with their peers in other countries, which we support immensely. We have established relations with other schools from foreign countries, and there are colleagues from the schools. We have established contacts at the level of schools, at the level of school founders. So we work together, joining forces. Thank you very much for your attention. That's it in a nutshell. when we talk about education in Russian, which methods and methodical tools do you use teaching history, Russian history? Because the content of education can be very different. It's a very interesting question you have raised, which is topical for lots of parents, especially Russian-speaking parents. They are really interested in that. We discussed all this for a long time, how to present not only Russian, but elements of Russian history, culture, and tradition. And we came to the conclusion that we can't teach Russian history in the way it is being taught in Russian schools in Russia. We focus on familiarizing our pupils with the elements of Russian culture, folk traditions, but not the history of Russian state. So you go beyond the standard history course. Well, I would rather say it is not the course of Russian statehood, which countries Russia would war, etc. So you work in accordance with the German methodology. Yes, we proceed from the Berlin framework principles, supplementing it with a Russian language tradition. Now we'll pass over to France. Director of the bilingual kindergarten, Ali Parusa, the Red Sails, Irina Badrova. Hello, everybody. I am happy to see you all and to participate in this conference. The questions on the agenda are very important. Our school was founded 5 years ago in Paris. Before that, we proceeded from the general education Russian language schools. The setup that official school endorsed by the ministry 5 years ago, and following the experience of our colleagues from Berlin, we started our work. Ours is a private school opened in 2017, and presently we teach 80 pupils. It is a kindergarten and the first level school. We have children up to the age of 12, and then they proceed to college education. So we deal with the initial primary bilingual education, so we're not faced with such challenging issues as teaching of history, for example. The main focus is on studying and preserving Russian, because we cater to the needs of not only children from bilingual families, we also welcome children who are simply interested in Russian language because they have some Russian roots, their parents having Russian backgrounds. And we also have children from families where both parents are Russian speakers, and that's why the child has to be mostly exposed to French. Being a private school, we still have to comply with the framework, educational principles of the French state, but it's up to us how much Russian we teach and what teachers we invite to collaborate with us. Our time is divided into two parts. Let's say from the early morning, we have only Russian-speaking classes. So for half a day, the child is exposed to Russian environment. But in the afternoon, the child is immersed in the French environment. And the following day, we switch the order, so starting with French, and then switching over to Russian in the afternoon. So the percentage is exactly 50-50, which is possible to preserve up to the 5th grade. After that, we have to deviate from the 50-50 principle. We are going to follow the experience of our German colleagues so that to see which subjects we have to teach in Russian, because the base is French. So what do you mean 50-50 is not enough? We need more French, because the requirements of the Ministry of Education, when more advanced school subjects are being taught, we cannot afford 50% of our school time. But we consider that up to the 5th grade, maybe 3rd grade, if a child is studying in 2 languages, and we don't differentiate between the state language and the minority language. And by the way, in France, they don't speak in terms of linguistic minority. They would rather refer to Russian-speaking French citizens. So I reiterate, we don't have such a notion as a Russian-speaking minority. I have lived in France for 30 years, and we all enjoy citizens' rights. So which language you study, it's a matter of your free choice. As compared with the state schools, our classes are rather small. We can afford to enroll about 20 children only, and that's why we pay more attention to each and every individual, and children feel themselves quite free. And we have faced the problem that we need to strengthen the exposure and teaching of Russian. So as in the recent years, we have been dealing with immigrant children, people coming from Russia, and that's why we have opened preparatory classes for the children who have never learned French before, and then they catch up, and then they can join our general classes. We are not going to dwell on the problems of bilingualism. For us, it's an obvious thing that children are to be taught from the very first days the language of the country and the family language. Thank you very much. Now we switch over to a Finnish municipal bilingual school. Maarit Kaunisto is deputy director of the municipal bilingual Finnish-Russian school. Ours is one of the 3 language schools in Finland where we offer in-depth learning of Russian. The next slide. So there is the technical hurdle for a moment. So the button does not react to the touch. So while technical issues are being addressed, I'm going to talk about the status of the Russian language and the support of the state. The majority of foreign language speaking citizens is a Russian-speaking minority. We have 190,000 of Russian speakers. This number constantly growing, and the majority of them live in the capital and the suburbs of the capital. So is there any hope we can turn on the presentation again? We can get it back? What are we supposed to do for that? We're back. Yeah. Okay, this is the 3rd slide. Unlike of many countries, the Finnish state keeps integrating Russian speakers into our society, financing cultural and educational activities. There are various Russian language interest clubs in Finland where both children, teenagers, and adults have an opportunity to participate. There is a cultural fund in Finland supporting and protecting the interest of Russian-speaking Finnish citizens at the level of the state. The Ministry of Education supports meetings between Russian speakers and Finnish-speaking people. The Finnish state supports multilingualism. It means that we support not only the development of the native language of the country, but the linguistic identity of our pupils, which promotes integration of those pupils into the Finnish society. According to research, a strong native language is a good base for the acquisition of further different foreign languages.
Furthermore, Finland tries to do the best in following the European Union policy, according to which each citizen of the EU should know as many other languages as possible, at least 1+2. Regardless of the national identity, all children in Finland have the right to be taught their native tongue for 2 hours a week. So the Russian language as a native or family language can be studied systematically, starting from the preschool age until the end of the 2nd stage of school. So the period of studying the mother tongue supported by state can be as long as 13, 14 years. This is our new school. In Finland, there are 2 teaching facilities with the Russian language and culture having the special status. Our Russian school in Helsinki and the school in Eastern Finland. Our school is unique insofar as the Russian language is taught as the first foreign language and as a mother tongue or home language for 4 to 5 hours per week. Thus, the Russian language students, starting from the first grade and until the end of the secondary school, can study the Russian language according to the national study program. At the moment, our school has 708 students. We have the preschool and the secondary, high school students. They are all in the same building. And so they have language integrated learning. A part of subjects is studied in the Russian language, especially in the primary school, because all the Russian-speaking have to have a good command of the Finnish language. This is our new facility. This is the first year of our work in a brand new building that was financed by the Ministry of Education and Culture. We have around 60 teachers and approximately half of them are bilingual. That is, they speak both Finnish and Russian. About 40% of students are Russian speaking and about 20% are bilingual and the rest are Finnish. And in conclusion, I'd like to share some photos from our school. We don't have traditional classrooms. We have a multi-sectoral teaching environment that has teaching spaces and smaller working rooms. In the middle, you can see the heart of the school is the space with the stairs and the cafeteria and a stage where you can host various events. And all the children and staff members are eating there in this space. Welcome to our school and thank you for your attention. Thank you for your pictures that made my heart bleed. Thank you so much. I'd like to hear a couple of words about a motto. Monolingualism can be healed. It is yours. No, it is European Union. I made it on purpose. Yes, I noticed that. Thank you so much. And that was in various languages. Thank you. We are now passing to the Veda Multilingual and Linguistic School in Prague, the Czech Republic, and its head, Helena Pinskaya. Well, of course, I had some professional envy when I listened to representatives of other countries, because that was yet another occasion for me to once again make sure that the principles of multilingual education in the Czech Republic, unfortunately, are very vague, and they are only taking some baby steps, because even though the state declares its openness to the principles of the European multilingual education, at the same time, in practice, unfortunately, that is very far from the ideal. And I would like to say a couple of words about our school. It is actually an entire educational facility that is overcoming some conflicts between the gap between the motors and the real life of school. Our educational school appeared as a school of additional or extracurricular activities, the thing that we called Saturday school in 2011. We were overcoming some organizational and financial difficulties because we always existed without any state support financially, even though we were trying to achieve some benefits. But still, we were staying afloat and we were trying to analyze the trends among our former citizens, because starting from the mid-90s, a lot of Russian-speaking people started arriving to the Czech Republic. And of course, the first thing that the young parents were asking was, where can we teach our children in the mother tongue? Because in the state schools, this question was not even asked. The state paid no attention, and I would even say still pays none. In some schools, there is teaching of the Russian as the second foreign language. And when we ask, can we make it the first foreign language? And they say no, because the first foreign language is the English language. Anyway, when we analyzed the social demand of our parents, we came to a conclusion that parents are expecting to have a school where you can not only learn the official language, but also could have an opportunity of learning the mother tongue and having some subjects in the native language. And in 2013, when we finally managed to implement this project, we faced some quite interesting phenomenon from the point of view of the organizational issues. That was the fact that when we said that we would like to have some subjects in the Russian language in our school, and we were said that no, you cannot do that, because most probably, and we had no enrollment yet, but they said that most probably you are going to have Russian children and the Russian will be native language for them. This is why you are not allowed to teach subjects in Russian. At the same time, we saw such practice in other schools, such as Czech English or Czech French schools, where English-speaking or French-speaking children came there and they were taught subjects in their mother tongue. That is what offended or insulted us, but did not surprise us. And now I think that currently this practice is only going to deteriorate. Of course, they were right that mostly children from Russian-speaking families came, mostly monolinguals, where both parents mostly speak Russian. And of course, we were looking for ways to solve this issue, and we were trying to use all the additional hours, extracurricular hours, and the hours of this curricular component to teach Russian, the Russian literature, the Russian language, and even some subjects in Russian, just as our colleagues in Germany, as an extracurricular, yes, the traditionally difficult subjects such as mathematics. In this case, we teach in parallel, in other hours. We teach it also in Russian, but it is, of course, yes, as an extracurricular. How many hours? 2 hours. 2 hours for mathematics. Russian language is as a second foreign language, but also 2 hours a week. And yes, of course, also we are broadening the the study of English language, because this is also the social demand of parents, because they want their children to speak the most widespread European language. And of course, the Czech language, as we should teach as a mother tongue. And of course, we are in all the possible ways supporting the teaching of the Czech language, 6 or 7 hours a week of just Czech language, and also subjects in the Czech. That these are facts. But I would also like to add that our focus is the careful attitude towards the mother tongue, because most of children come to the Czech Republic, as I also think as in other countries, they come against their will. Their parents want or are forced to move, but children don't want to move, and they don't want to comply with this fact, especially if they are over 10, if they are teenagers, when they are very aware and they are suffering for their native environment, friends, and so on and so forth. This is why we consider that a careful attitude towards one's mother tongue, respect to one's mother tongue, only enables teaching of other languages. This is why we work a lot with our staff members, who are mostly Czech pedagogues, but they are also actively using the assistance of Russian-speaking assistants who work in the classrooms in order to help children to overcome this barrier, especially in the very first beginning, their limited knowledge of the Czech language. We also work a lot with our pedagogues to improve their qualifications, because the methods of teaching of children who do not speak the language of the country are, of course, different from the classroom where all the children speak the same language as the teacher. This is the last photo. This is the end of my presentation, and I wanted to use it because we always say that our family is open to families, open to languages, and it is friendly towards families, languages, and children. Because unlike the state schools, it is true that our doors are always open. Children can come to the room of the principal, they can come to the room of teachers if they have any issues, questions, and the same applies to the teachers, where in a state school you are not allowed to enter without a prior appointment. The school is locked with a key. Yes, there are, of course, security concerns, but I'd say that the Czech Republic is a conflict-less and a secure, safe country where children go to school on their own from 7 years, also using the public transport. Oh, I'm sorry, I a little bit drifted away from my prepared speaking notes because I listened to my colleagues. And you had this question about the teaching of history, because we have the principal, the basic school, first to ninth grades, and unlike Irina's school, we have this issue.
Вот, в рамках образовательной программы,
конечно. Important question. And within our general educational program, we don't teach Russian history as the history of the state, but these questions are raised and our children get interested and ask their questions during culture and literature lessons. And these questions, especially most painful historical moments, are to be addressed, and we use the discussion club's methods, familiarizing our children with various points of view and opinions on the historical events in which Russia took part. Thus, we are trying to accustom or to make our pupils used to multiple approach. We now pass over to the European Association via Light, and the floor is given to its coordinator, Tatiana Mlechko. Thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this discussion. I am extremely interested in being present here in Latvia, as Moldova is, just like Latvia, a post-Soviet state, and we started from approximately similar positions, and the percentage of Russian speakers in Moldova and Latvia used to be practically the same, but we arrived at different results. And taken into account our previous session on national minorities, I would like to remind you of the fact that in the 90s of the previous century, the solution of national and linguistic questions in multilingual, multinational countries, all these battles can be lost or won in the sphere of education. And to make my opinion as an expert better grounded, I have to say that some time ago, I used to lead the state structure within our government responsible for the inter-ethnic relations and language policy. And I also was head of the only Russian language school of higher learning in Moldova. But being aware of the time limit, I'm not going to dwell on all those facts. I would like to share with you my conclusions as an expert, whether multilingual education is good for everybody. Not for everybody, I would say, but the niche for multilingual education is to be present in every country interested in inter-ethnic harmony and complying with the rights of multilingual society. It is multilingual education as a part and parcel of the strategy declared in the very motto of the European Union as unity in diversity. Multilingual education means communication with no barriers. And if we look at the prospects of such an education, I can say that presently it is a very essential way of socializing an individual. As a pedagogical phenomenon, it's an extremely complicated when it comes to logistics and all its components model of education. And using just one example, I would like to show you how many elements are there in this model. This is a simplified scheme demonstrating that we need at least 10 components to ensure the success of bilingual segment in education. There has to be a social demand, first and foremost. There has to be an adequate legal framework. There should be an international standard. Up to now, there have been created a lot of very interesting tools, and without taking into account that experience, we cannot start creating our own model. It's like inventing a wheel. Of course, we need to have our own base and a motivating environment and donors and funds. There should be an educational methodical complex. Without all such components, we will fail to create a full-fledged educational model. I would like to acquaint you with an experience of creating such a system in a minority region of our republic. I'm talking about Gagauzia, an autonomous administrative unit which was set up in 1994, and that's the only place on earth where Gagauz people have their own statehood. It's a small region of their compact dwelling. The Gagauz are Orthodox Christian, Russian-speaking Turks. And after Moldova gained its sovereignty, we were faced with the challenge of how to help the Gagauz preserve the language, the Gagauz language, and they also had to learn the state Moldovan language. And we have used the experience of multilingual schools functioning in Europe. Secondly, there is a national legislative base, multi-branch framework. And I would like to focus on one specific, to highlight one specific document targeting organization of bilingual educational establishments in Moldova, which are still functioning as Russian as language of instruction schools. And these schools are supposed to gain the status of bilingual schools. Every fifth child is being taught in Russian now, and so Russian language schools are supposed to switch over to a bilingual model. The same concerns Gagauzia. And another necessary component is the motivating linguistic environment. For this, we needed specific conditions, we needed donors, and as donors, we have been privileged to have the financial support of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and they supported us. Over the time since we started the project, we have achieved a lot. In 2015, there were worked out ideal printed materials for the teaching of Gagauz language. In 2016, we proceeded, and in 2017, we already started teaching in our schools. We got all the necessary educational base for instructing children in both in Gagauz and the state languages. We created the platform for remote learning for the teaching of Gagauz, Moldovan, and Romanian languages. We worked with the prospective teachers to get them prepared. We also worked with parents. And I have to say that the parents were very responsive, very good. And of course, we need good partners and donors. And the OSCE helped us with the realization of the project as good partners and donors. I have to mention the Turkish Republic, because we really needed their support. We also gained support of an organization from Switzerland, and in the period from 2015 to 2020, we have set up 20 kindergartens. We have prepared 80 teachers. I don't know why the picture hasn't popped up, but the name of the project I'm referring to is Integration with Respect towards Diversity. So what's the situation like today? It's 2022, and we have 53 operating bilingual kindergartens with well-prepared teachers. So what is my main message? So that something gets started, there should be a lot of components in place. Some of them I have mentioned here. And to sum up, I have to say that our population is multi-ethnic, and people are after preserving their native languages, and creation of the bilingual education niche is extremely important, in great demand, and it's a recipe for overcoming of a lot of intolerant activities by representatives of various ethnicities. Thank you very much. I would like to wish your republic an expedient joining of the European Union. And we conclude our round table with the representative of Germany again, Marina Burt, CEO of Mitra Lomonosov. Thank you very much. The experience shared with you by Dr. Alexander Ott was very interesting, and I would like to conclude this discussion, although I can't see my presentation. What I wanted to say, there will be no presentation. No, there is a way. If there is a will, there is a way. I would like to tell you of what I observe within the European space and beyond, because I have been privileged not only to head the Mitra organization, which has created the system of bilingual kindergartens and Lomonosov schools. I was at the very source of bilingual education in Europe, and I would like to say that I think unification of Europe in the year 2000, served as an impetus for the spread of multilingualism, bilingualism, and of course, it was prompted by economic mobility and attempts to create instruments for approximation of the general education in different countries, and multilingualism was considered a stabilizing factor in the process of such an integral European education, and not only.
Before going to Riga, I tried to get in touch with researchers in multilingualism, because when we created our very first bilingual facility in 2002, before that we used to have a society, an international society of parents and teachers of Berlin. And the notion of multilingualism was not yet there, because parents came with their mother tongues. The official language was the German one, but the unification of Europe and our experience of integration of Russian-speaking children and families into the system of German education made us think about the analysis of that process, not to base our activities on intuition, but to use the international experience, namely that of Finland and the experience of German federal lands bordering France that have a very, very active experience of organizing bilingual structures. And in the early 2000s, when the United European Union was created, we started observing a situation where the task of upbringing and educating a child from a monolingual person into a multifaceted, multilingual citizen of a united Europe and world passed from the task of a family into a task of the organization of a new approach and an institutional approach. That is, within a family, it is ineffective if we take into account the organizational aspects of education and the scale in which it became organized in the year 2000 and on. Starting from 2000, the process of transformation became very active. The Saturday schools were transformed into bilingual kindergartens or preschools, and it was an institutional process. The bilingualism started being supported. In 2000, the system of bilingual schools also started being created. And in this regard, the Baltic states also are a source of experience for the entire world. But Germany, with its highly developed political culture, regardless of the tragedy of the 20th century, regardless of the division of Germany, still it was decisive, because the very first interesting models of bilingual preschools, bilingual schools, even including the state-financed schools and kindergartens, appeared exactly in Germany, and they served as an example for us. Over the last 20 years, we can say that, of course, several models were used. Such models as immersive education, the ones from Canada and other countries of the world, Of course, we used models of European schools in Berlin. Starting from 1993, there was an entire range of bilingual schools. There are around 30 bilingual schools right now. And interestingly, an entire chain of private schools, bilingual private schools appeared, which demonstrate that the private education, in case where you have a well thought legal system in your country, and if you also have the relevant financing of these private facilities, they do become a very important component of the pedagogical landscape of countries, as for example in France, in England, in Germany, and even in such a country as the United States, where one would say, what is mother tongues in the US, Spanish or Russian? But you know, there is experience of a very close exchange with various schools, and we were overwhelmed or fascinated by the trends in the United States education that over the last 5 years have very seriously considered the system of bilingual education with involvement of the Spanish and other mother tongues of children. In conclusion, I'd like to say that here we had an opportunity to listen about very interesting and well-functioning models that have popped up over the last 30 years in Finland and 20 years in Europe. And I would like to say that the models of bilingual education are mostly suggested or offered by private schools, and even the Russian School of Helsinki originally was founded as a private school. The Finnish Russian School first was founded as a private school, and only later it transformed into a municipal school financed on the state level. And I think that the practice and the establishment of bilingual schools only becomes an important component of the general educational landscape of a country if the country in question has a well-developed political culture. Because here one needs a certain level of maturity of society and of political institutes, where people understand that by supporting different mother tongues of your citizens, as Irina was very right to underline, that in France there is no such notion as national minorities. There are French citizens with Russian mother tongue, among others. There is this maturity of political culture, which makes sure that there can be a serious and successful bilingual upbringing and education of children. Further on, I'd like to stress that for any bilingual school, the most important aspect is the state language, the official language, the language of the country where this school exists, where it was born and where it carries its educational mission. Only by respecting the mother tongue, the native language of the children, of their mothers, of their families, when they feel that their native language is respected, only then you can expect any motivation and even increased motivation within these children to study the state language where they of the country where they live, which is very natural for the parents because they wish for economic success of their children. Also, I would like to stress that the bilingual schools are becoming an oasis for experiments in pedagogical area that are extremely important in the context of the globalization of political structures, economic structures. And of course, it is important, and I think that the policymakers in education should not be afraid of these shapes of education or organizational aspects of this education, but they should rather study and analyze international experience and suggest the most promising and successful shapes of education. And rather than be hiding, they should face the challenges of the modern society and modern times. And if you ask me, or if you ask us, what is important for us, for people who have been working for long years, 30 years is the age of my organization, and the colleagues also have been working for more than 10 or 15 years. What is important? It is important to have international fora. It is important to have platforms, to have an opportunity to exchange experience, to be aware of the advantages and disadvantages, to analyze the percentage experiments that Irina mentioned, and Alexander also touched upon it, because we also had this situation where we first had 60-40, now 70-30 towards the state language, because we're thinking about the future of these children. They are going to enroll into universities and so on with the official language. So the platform that we have today, thanks to the Social Democratic Group of the European Parliament, represented by the Latvian members, it is very, very important. It is necessary. And this is a very young branch in the pedagogical sciences, the pedagogy of bilingualism. And I think that such meetings, such discussions, such educational activity among the parents, colleagues, and policymakers responsible for the educational policy of countries, it is a very, very important aspect that has to be taken into account when we speak about the development and improvement of political culture of countries. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these words. When we announced that conference, we had a more narrow agenda, but last week it was announced in Latvia that starting with the year 2023, there is a plan to switch over to Latvian as the only language of instruction. So thank you very much for your contribution and for observing the time frame. Thank you very much. We are going to continue our conference for 2 more days. On Tuesday, starting with 1 p.m., we are going to discuss economics and the forthcoming economic crisis and what awaits Europe. On Wednesday, we are going to discuss information, disinformation, and functioning of mass media in the languages of Europe. Thank you for having been with us.